Okay, geometry, we are going to do our last lesson on quadratics here, on completing the square. So, let's see, we're on page 12 of the notes. So remember, what we've been talking about here is the different ways to solve quadratics. So we have using square roots, factoring, the quadratic formula, completing the square, which we're going to do today, and then graphing. And so we're actually doing both of these today. You should know how to do all of these. And unfortunately, I'm aware that some people just say, oh, I'm just going to use the quadratic formula all the time. That is not the proper decision to make here, because the quadratic formula is true. It always will work. So the quadratic formula is the only thing that will always work, but it is also the one that you can make the most errors on. And so, and in addition to that, generally you'll want a calculator for the quadratic formula, because you might be multiplying big numbers and doing all sorts of things. And so if you can't use a calculator on the test, then how is the quadratic formula going to help you? And finally, if you have any intention at all of taking Algebra 2, you have to know how to do this and factor and complete the square. This one's really easy. You'll like this one. But you have to know them all. So please do not just take this simple-minded approach and say, I'm just going to use the quadratic formula, because you are missing other information you need to know. So, okay, anyhow, so let's first do completing the square. So this is based on the perfect square trinomial. Hopefully you remember that. The perfect square trinomial is well, I'll just give you one. Let's say we have x squared plus, and we'll put a 9 over here. So that would be a 6x here. This is a perfect square trinomial. Remember, this is your perfect square, and this is a perfect square. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 9 is 3. So you multiply those together, and then you double it, and you get 6x. And if that number is this number, you have a perfect square trinomial. And so that factors then super easy as x plus 3 squared. X plus 3. And remember, that plus sign comes from this sign right there. So these are perfect square trinomials, and completing the square is when you are creating a perfect square trinomial. All right? So, first of all, this is recommended to use only when b. So remember what b is. B is the value here. So only use this when b is even, and a, which is this number in front of the x squared, is 1. Now notice, you could use it anytime, but when a is not 1 or b is not even, it creates more and more work. And so it's recommended, but you could do it at any time. In fact, in the future, like in pre-calc, we'll do it all the time. But for now, we're going to just use these boundaries. We want b to be even and a, the coefficient in front of x squared, to be a 1. Okay, here's your steps. And we're going to do this using this equation right here. Okay, so step 1, start with the equation in standard form and set it equal to 0. So we took care of that right there. Step 2, move constant to other side of the equal sign. So I'm moving, first, before we do that, when you're here, make sure b is even, which in this case b is 6, so it's even. That's good. And then make sure a is 1, which it is. So, okay, move constant to the other side. So since I was adding 7, I'm now subtracting 7. All right. Now you're going to take your b and you're going to divide it by 2. And you can do this mentally if you want. So over here, I look at my b value, which is right there, and I divide it by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. All right, then square it. So right here you can see I took b, I divided it by 2 and got 3. I said 3 squared is 9, so I put that 9 right here. I add 9. So the difference from this equation to this equation is I added 9. Where did I get the 9? I take my b value, I divide it by 2, and I square it. And that's where I got the 9. Now remember, I can do anything I want to my equation as long as I do the same thing to both sides. So I added 9 on the left, and then I have to add 9 on the right as well. Now I have created, what I have done is this here is my perfect square trinomial. As soon as I add that 9, I have made a perfect square trinomial. X is a perfect square, 9 is a perfect square. The square root of x squared is x. Square root of 9 is 3. 3 times x is 3x. Double it and you get 6x. I made the perfect square trinomial. And there it is factored, x plus 3. And then negative 7 plus 9 is 2. So right here, I have completed the square. I've done it. When you make a perfect square trinomial and factor it, you have completed the square. And now we want to solve it. And now we're going to solve it by doing square roots. So we square root both sides. Right here, we did the square root of both sides of the equation. We added our plus or minus. So then we have x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. And I subtract 3. And I have two answers, negative 3 plus the square root of 2, negative 3 minus the square root of 2. Okay, so now we're going to do it. So step 1, make sure it's in standard form. Make sure A is a 1, which it is, and make sure B is even, which it is. So I'm going to say 0 equals x squared plus 2x minus 10. All right, step 2, move my 10 to the other side. So that means I have 10 equals x squared plus 2x. And now off to the side, I'm going to say, okay, b divided by 2 squared. That's what I want to add here. And then I also have to add it here on the left side. Okay, so what is my b? b is 2. 2 divided by 2 squared. Well, 2 divided by 2 is 1 squared, and that is 1. So I'm going to add 1 here, and I'm going to add 1 here. Okay, you guys, I just had major technical difficulty, so I hope this is going to work okay for you. But anyhow, so we found our 1. So then what we have is 11 equals x squared plus 2x plus 1. Now this, what we've created right there, is a perfect square trinomial. Okay? And so we know then, I just did not leave enough space in here, but we know that that's going to factor. So we have 11 equals x plus, remember how to factor that. It's just the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 1 is 1 squared. And so now we're going to use square roots to solve that. So I'm going to square root both sides, and I have plus or minus the square root of 11 equals x plus 1. So to get x alone, I subtract 1, plus or minus the square root of 11 equals x, and there's my answer. I have two answers. Okay, let's do another one, b. So again, make sure you're in standard form. Make sure A is 1, check. Make sure B is even. Yep, because B is a 4. So therefore, I'm going to put a 0 in here. And now I'm going to move my constant to the other side, so I add 11 to both sides. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add something to both sides of my equation. And what am I going to add to both sides of my equation? Well, I'm going to take my b value, divide it by 2, and square it. So in this case, b is a negative 4. You don't really need to mess with that negative because you're going to square it, so it doesn't really matter. But regardless, you could say negative 4 divided by 2 squared will give you a negative 2 squared, which is a positive 4. So I'm adding 4. And so I have 15 equals, this now is a perfect square trinomial, and it factors like x minus 2 squared. And by the way, this 2 right here, okay, that number is simply b divided by 2. Okay, this number, the 4, is b divided by 2 squared. This number is b divided by 2. Also, please notice that if this is a negative, this is a negative, right? But anyhow, so here we are. We have 15 equals x minus 2 squared. So I have to square root both sides. So plus or minus square root of 15 equals x minus 2. And so then I'm going to add 2. So 2 plus or minus the square root of 15 equals x. There's my answer. 2 solutions. All right, C. Now when you get to C, you got to be careful because you might look at it quick and say, oh, that's a perfect square trinomial. But it's not, because this is a negative. This, in order to be a perfect square trinomial, the last sign has to be positive. Okay? This sign can be positive or negative, but this sign must be positive right there. Must be positive to be a perfect square trinomial. Therefore, this is not a perfect square trinomial. All right, so what I'm going to do is, it's in standard form, so I'm going to put it equal to 0. So 0 equals x squared plus 4x minus 4. I move my constant to the other side, so 4 equals x squared plus 4x. And now I'm going to add something to both sides of my equation. What am I going to add? I'm going to take the b value, divide by 2, and square it. So b is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and I square it, and I get 4. So I'm adding 4 to both sides. And now this is a perfect square trinomial. Notice that's a plus sign now. So what I have is 4 plus 4 on the left, which is 8. And then I can factor this as x plus 2 squared. Remember, this number right here is b divided by 2. Okay? So now solving that equation, I'm going to, oh my. All right, I'm going to square root both sides. So I have plus or minus square root of 8 equals x plus 2. Well, the square root of 8, remember, is 4 times 2, and there's a perfect square in there. So this is actually plus or minus 2 square root of 2 equals x plus 2. I subtract 2, so I have negative 2 plus or minus 2 radical 2 equals x. And there's my answer for C. All right, let's do D. All right, so I need to put this in standard form and move my 7 over, but I also know the very next step is I'm going to move the 7 back there, right? So I'm okay with it just like that, and I'm just going to start completing the square. And so I do x squared minus 2x, I need to add a number, equals 7 plus a number. What number am I going to add? B divided by 2 squared, which is negative 2 divided by 2 squared. This would be a negative 1 squared is a positive 1. That's what I add to both sides. So on the right, I have 8. 7 plus 1 is 8. Over here, I have a perfect square trinomial, and I do the square root of the first term, which is x, the square root of the second term, which is 1. The minus sign goes here, and I square it. Now I'm going to square root both sides, so x minus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 8. We already said that the square root of 8 is 2 radical 2 from the previous problem, so x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2 radical 2. And so then x equals 1 plus or minus 2 radical 2. All right, next problem. E. This is not in standard form, and I need that 2x to the other side. I can leave the constant to the right, though, so I'm going to say x squared minus 2x equals 3. All right, so I'm ready to go to complete the square. So I'm going to say x squared minus 2x plus something equals 3 plus something. That something is going to be b divided by 2 squared. So b, in this case, is negative 2 again. divided by 2 squared, which would be a positive 1. That's what I'm adding. So this is a perfect square trinomial. X minus 1 squared equals 4. Square root both sides, so x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 4, which is 2. So then I'm going to add 1. So x equals 1 plus or minus 2. Well, those are numbers that you can add. So 1 plus 2 means x equals 3. 1 minus 2 means x equals a negative 1. So there's my answers there. Finally, for f, again, it's not in standard form. So I'm going to go, let me change colors. Okay. So I have x squared minus 2x minus 5 equals 0. Move my constant to the other side. X squared minus 2x plus something equals 5 plus something. What am I going to add? B divided by 2 squared. So 2 is b, or actually negative 2 is b. And again, I have the 1 squared, which is 1, 1. So I have x minus 1 squared equals 6. Square root both sides, plus or minus the square root of 6, and add 1. 1 plus or minus the square root of 6. There's my answer. So that's completing the square. And you're going to work on that in your homework tonight. Okay, last way to solve a quadratic. This is the best way. You're going to love this. Okay, so you look at a graph. So here you go. Here's your example. What is the solution to this quadratic? This is the graph of the quadratic right there, that parabola. So remember, when we talk about solutions, we're talking about where does it cross the x-axis. And we have 2 spots, 1, 2. So I can look at this graph and I can say the solutions are negative 1 and positive 2. Right here and right there. And there it is. That's how easy it is to solve looking at a graph. So you'll get to do that in your homework too. Just remember, you're looking at the x-intercepts. And you have 3 options. You can have 2 solutions, 1 solution, that's when the vertex is on the x-axis, or no solution. Remember, that's when you're floating above or below it. This one is vertex is on x-axis. And there you go. It's the end of our lesson.